everybody.
Good morning.
It's always a joy to be here. Sure, of course, I wish there were more, but your presence is a joy to me. I forgot to put two people on the prayer list, and I'd like to take this time to put them on. Both of them are family, and they are down in Indiana. But my grandson-in-law, yes, that's what Rachel said originally. His name is Rory, R-O-R-Y. Last name is Buckman. He cut his hand last week, had to have surgery on it, and he cannot use his hand for 2 weeks, even though his job requires the use of his hand. And so there's a little bit of problems there as far as that's concerned. And I guess he's going to have to go see a hand surgeon to be able to correct it. So if you will, keep him on your prayer list. And the other is that unspoken request that I've been asking about. And there has been some positive movement. Notice I said positive movement on that. And still not to the extent that I would like, but I can see God working in that particular situation. So let's keep that unspoken request in your prayer line. Today is Father's Day. And I tell you that when it comes to these special days of the year, Father's Day and Mother's Day, anniversaries and so forth, I get a little bit emotional. And especially the fact that when I was growing up, and there's no doubt about it, no doubt about it, I was a daddy's boy. I would have to honestly say that my brother, who was a little bit older than I was a mommy's boy. It just worked out perfectly. I don't know whether it fell that way or was planned that way, but that's the way it always was. My brother got the musical talent that my mother had, and I got I don't know what from my dad. But Dad was a very interesting person. Whenever you see him, you probably saw me most of the time. In fact, I worked in the same place that he did when I was in college. I went through college by working in the steel mills. And for some reason, we got in the same mill department. And I was with Dad quite a bit. He was a millwright in the Jones and Laughlin Steel Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it very interested me about my dad because he had very little education as far as school learning was concerned. I cannot remember exactly when he dropped out of school, but I think it was 4th or 5th grade. Even though he took classes later on in the electrical engineering, was able to be a very expert electrician if he wanted to be. But my dad was a very intelligent person. I remember helping him. We had an apartment, a 2-room apartment growing up during the Depression years. And I remember that the apartment had a basement. Our particular apartment had a basement. And he had a little workshop down there. We'd go down and build things and sell them. And I would go down into the basement with him whenever he was working. And I would anticipate the tools that he needed, run the tools or the supplies he needed. I was his little gopher, I guess you would call it. And Dad made some beautiful, beautiful bookcases and things of this sort. And my bookcases looked like a modern style, where and those jobs was even and so forth. It was every time I tried to make something like that, I couldn't even begin to match what my dad did. He was a person that understood his Bible, very intellectual when it came to his Bible. And it was a matter of he's just a little bit humiliated by whenever he had to speak in public. But He eventually overcame that, and I think I had something to do with that. But the first page of my outline this morning deals with a lot of things Dad did. I talk about his speaking in public. One time when my brother and I were in Kentucky Christian College, Mom and Dad came down to visit, both of us. And we went to church at the Grayson Church that morning. Freddie Griffith, who was the minister, at the time of the benediction, looked down, and I guess he got all the information from my brother, but Freddie recognized my dad and some of the accomplishments, the fact that 2 sons, both settled for the ministry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he called on Dad for the benediction. And that was a no-no. Dad hated to speak in public. He hated to pray in public. And it was so funny. He had a beautiful prayer. And before the congregation finished that response, which we use as thank you, Lord, saving my soul, he was out in the building. He was right in the middle of the pew. And I can remember I think as he was saying amen, he was getting out of the pew because he was so embarrassed. Out to the car, and he waited in the car for us. And when I preached at the church in Greenford, I used to work with him, and I helped him, I hope, to overcome his problem with praying in public because he prayed. He even preached a couple of sermons because it was very instrumental in starting some of the churches in the Pittsburgh area, North Hills, and so forth. When I was preaching in Greenford, they would come down quite a bit because it was about an hour drive between us. I would go up there. But one Sunday morning, one of the ladies in the church, Ethel Huffman, came to me, and Ethel was one of the elders' wives, a very, very sweet person. I was very close to the Huffmans, and there was quite a few in the church. But she said, you know, your dad was crying during your sermon. And I said, oh, really? She says, oh, and I would say something to him. And he said, it wasn't the fact that what I was saying. It's that I was saying it. Now, you probably know, I've probably mentioned it before, that I had a speech impediment up until the time I had started preaching. If it had not been for some of the professors at KCC, as well as my wife, I don't know whether I would be speaking today or not. You probably wish that I had never got over it because you can't shut me up. But Dad was, to me, in my opinion, a friend. He was a mentor because I don't know how many times I would call him and ask him questions about things that were going on. And he was a confidant. When he died, about 73, I think it was, I lost a friend. I lost my mentor. I lost my confidant. I asked Steve what he remembered about my dad. Steve said that he remembered is taking movies, family pictures, movies. I also remembered some of the cars that he had. I asked Ruth what she could remember about my dad. And she remembered a trip that Steve and Mary Alice pulled on. Mary Alice was babysitting the baby next door. And so the dad and the mom were visiting at one time. And Dad said, well, I'll drive you. You don't have to walk today. I'll drive you to work. So they took them on a journey all through Proctorville or that Road Township and ended up, and when Dad said, where to now? And Steve says, right there, right next door. And that was Steve, you know Steve. Thing I thought Ruth was saying, the last conversation that I had with my dad was when I told him that Ruth had been baptized. And he went all through the complex in Florida, bragging about the fact that he lived long enough to see his last grandchild. buried with Christ. I say this because I'm sure that any of you can stand up before this congregation and tell a similar story about your parents. Of course, if you listen to Steve, you're not going to get that. We all, and I love what Nancy has in the bulletin and what Mike referred to. I will never live up to the example my dad set for me. And I'm trying. And I appreciate very, very much the sacrifices that he made down through the years until he passed away. I still have books in my library that have his name in it because I got them from his library. I tell you this because when I look at the life of Jesus, I see in Jesus a similar relationship. And by my speaking of what my dad was like, it helps me to understand the relationship that Jesus had with his Father in heaven. In fact, one of the reasons why I studied so much the episode of his going into the Garden of Gethsemane and praying right before his arrest and trial. If you recall, when he went a little bit further, leaving Peter, James, and John, he fell on the ground. And one of the commentaries I studied this past week was it was more of he just lost his balance and went forward because he was so much in stress as far as the thing that was going to take place. Then he cried out, Abba, Father. Now, I have probably said this before, but Abba, Father, the Abba happens to be an Aramaic word. And it's a word that we equate with the idea of daddy, papa. It was a term of endearment. And to properly translate that, to properly understand it, Jesus cried out and said, Father, Daddy, Daddy. And he was speaking of that relationship that he enjoyed with God in heaven, that we enjoyed with our fathers on earth. And I think it would help us to understand that relationship if we were to consider some of the things about God. First of all, he was the embodiment of all power. Nothing he could do as long as it was within his nature to do it. I say that because God cannot lie. He cannot sin and so forth, but it's within his nature. He can do all things. He spoke and the world was. He was creator. God is the author of all miracles. He's the giver of all prophecy. So when you consider the relationship between God and Jesus, that relationship was so close that Jesus was able to do the things he did. God is the embodiment of all wisdom, all scientific knowledge. One of the books that I have read several times, I don't fully understand it. But I think it's one of the greatest books ever written, other than the Bible. It's called The Biblical Basis for Modern Science. Written by a fellow by the name of Morris. And as you read that book, every aspect of science can be founded in the Bible in its true sense. I think there's a lot of pseudoscience out there, false science, trying to disprove God that cannot be proven by the Bible. But I think all science has its basis in biblical teaching as a result of reading that book. In fact, I'll share with you. I loaned my book to Art Bush. And Art Bush started reading. He says, I read it. I don't understand it, but I still read it. I still have not received that book back from Art Bush. And that was 10, 12 years ago that I loaned it to him. Steve finally found one on the internet for sale. And he bought it for me because he knew how much I liked the book. So I told Art, I said, you can keep it. You can keep it. How interesting. And God is everywhere. He makes the promise in Hebrews, the 13th chapter. I believe it's the second verse. No, I'm looking for Hebrews. There it is, Hebrews 13:5. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave nor forsake you. How beautiful. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Psalms 23. And then he said, when Jesus said as he ascended into heaven, and lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Abba, Daddy, Daddy, Papa, Papa, I need you. Give me the strength I need. The point I want to make is this. That relationship that Jesus had with God the Father, where he can cry, Daddy, Daddy, can be ours as well. As a proof for that, the word Abba occurs 3 times in the Word of God. It also occurs in Romans the 5th chapter, verses 15 and 16. For ye have received the spirit of bondage again to fear. Ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. In other words, we as Christians should share that relationship that Jesus had with his Father, God, and the same Father can be our Abba, Abba, Daddy, Daddy as well. Galatians, the 4th chapter, verses 5 through 8. To redeem them that are under the law, that they might receive the adoption of sons. And because ye are sons, God has sent forth his Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Again, as Christians, we have that relationship, that very same relationship that Jesus had with God, Abba, Abba, Father, Daddy, 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 Daddy. Therefore, we will not fear, no matter what happens to us in life. We will not despair when things don't go as we think they should. We will find the strength in that relationship. We will find the courage in that relationship. We will find the love, the mercy, the forgiveness in that relationship. Abba, Abba, Daddy, Daddy, our God in heaven. We're going to be singing our song of limitation, and I can't remember what it is.
Just as I.
Just as I am, one verse. Decision time. If you have a decision to make for Christ, we encourage you to make it as we sing.